Osmoregulation. The learning objective of this lesson is to explain how the kidneys serve as the main osmoregulatory organs in the human body. Osmoregulation is the process of maintaining salt and water balance, osmotic balance, across membranes within the body. The fluids inside and surrounding cells are composed of water, electrolytes, a compound that dissociates into ions when dissolved in water, and non-electrolytes, which does not dissociate into ions in water. The body fluids include blood plasma, fluid that exists within cells, and the interstitial fluid that exists in the spaces between cells and tissues of the body. The membranes of the body, both the membranes around cells and the membranes made of cells lining body cavities, are semipermeable membranes. Semipermeable membranes are permeable to certain types of solutes and to water, but typically cell membranes are impermeable to solutes. The body does not exist in isolation. There is a constant input of water and electrolytes into the system. Excess water, electrolytes, and wastes are transported to the kidneys and excreted, helping to maintain osmotic balance. Insufficient fluid intake results in fluid conservation by the kidneys. Biological systems constantly interact and exchange water and nutrients with the environment by way of consumption of food and water and through excretion in the form of sweat, urine, and feces. Without a mechanism to regulate osmotic pressure, or when a disease damages this mechanism, there is a tendency to accumulate toxic wastes and water, which can have dire consequences. Mammalian systems have evolved to regulate not only the overall osmotic pressure across membranes, but also specific concentration of important electrolytes in the three major fluid compartments: blood plasma, interstitial fluid, and intracellular fluid. Since osmotic pressure is regulated by the movement of water across membranes, the volume of the fluid compartments can also change temporarily. Since blood plasma is one of the fluid components, osmotic pressure have a direct bearing on blood pressure. The human excretory system functions to remove waste from the body through the skin as sweat, the lungs in the form of exhaled carbon dioxide, and through the urinary system in the form of urine. All three of these systems participate in osmoregulation and waste removal. Here, we focus on the urinary system, which is comprised of the paired kidneys, the ureter, urinary bladder, and urethra. The kidneys are a pair of bean-shaped structures that are located just below the liver in the body cavity. In the renal cortex, each of the kidneys contain more than 1 million tiny units called nephrons that filter blood containing the metabolic wastes from cells. All the blood in the human body is filtered about 60 times a day by the kidneys. The nephrons remove wastes, concentrate them, and form urine that is collected in the bladder. The renal medulla is comprised of several renal pyramids that are embedded in the medulla, which is the thickest kidney layer. The renal pelvis collects the urine and leads to the ureter on the outside of the kidney. The ureters are urine-bearing tubes that exit in the kidney and empty into the urinary bladder. Blood enters each kidney from the aorta, the main artery supplying the body below the heart, through a renal artery. It is distributed in smaller vessels until it reaches each nephron in capillaries. Within the nephron, the blood comes in intimate contact with the waste-collecting tubules in a structure called the glomerulus. Water and many solutes present in the blood, including ions of sodium, calcium, magnesium, and others, as well as wastes and valuable substances such as amino acids, glucose, and vitamins, leave the blood and enter the tubule system of the nephron. As materials pass through the tubule, much of the water, required ions, and useful compounds are reabsorbed back into the capillaries that surround the tubules, leaving the wastes behind. Some of this reabsorption requires active transport and consumes ATP. Some wastes, including ions and some drugs remaining in the blood, diffuse out of the capillaries into the interstitial fluid and are taken up by the tubule cells. These wastes are then actively secreted into the tubules. The blood then collects in larger and larger vessels and leaves the kidney in the renal vein. The renal vein joins the inferior vena cava, the main vein that returns blood to the heart from the lower body. The amounts of water and ions reabsorbed into the circulatory system are carefully regulated, and this is an important way the body regulates its water content and ion levels. The waste is collected in larger tubules and then leaves the kidney in the ureter, which leads to the bladder where urine, the combination of waste materials and water, is stored. The bladder contains sensory nerves, stretch receptors that signals when it needs to be emptied. These signals create the urge to urinate, which can be voluntarily suppressed up to a limit. The conscious decision to urinate sets in place signals that open the sphincters, rings of smooth muscle that close off the opening, to the urethra that allows urine to flow out of the bladder and the body. In summary, the kidneys are the main osmoregulatory organs in mammalian systems. They function to filter blood and maintain the dissolved ion concentrations of body fluids. They are made up internally of three distinct regions: the cortex, medulla, and pelvis. The blood vessels that transport blood into and out of the kidneys arrive from and merge with the aorta and inferior vena cava, respectively. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney, which actively filters blood and generates urine. The urine leaves the kidney through the ureter and it is stored in the urinary bladder. Urine is void from the body through the urethra.